Of course, Charlotte, because at the end of the day, nothing can change. It's very unlikely anyone can pass any laws. Even though the sort of united left front had the largest number of deputies, they can't do anything by themselves. And even then, I would question how long this Nouveau Front Populaire is actually going to hang together. Because when you look at their underlying policies, fundamental policies, they're really quite different. You're going from the moderate left to centre left, all the way to the very far left. And I do wonder how long that can hold together. Obviously, presenting a front against the Rassemblement National, the far right, that worked. And that was the common goal. How that works going forwards in practice, I am rather unclear. And I think what is very likely, as you said, hung parliament, which is unusual in France. We're not used to this, firstly. And secondly, it does make the chance of another legislative election, unfortunately, in a year's time. Remember, President Macron cannot hold a legislative election for 12 months now, but it's quite likely that that will be held in another 12 months. And we'll be back to the polls for 2 rounds yet again in a year's time.
Hooray, keeping us busy. But what's important, what you just said at the very beginning, nothing can change. And that's an issue in itself, because of course we know public finances, the question of the deficit in France, we had an excessive deficit procedure from the Commission, the downgrades we've seen recently. So what does that mean for that issue?
Well, on the other hand, you would argue we were already in that situation, Charlotte, because already the Ensemble party under President Macron was struggling to pass laws and make any fundamental changes in any case. So I think in any case, they would have struggled to pass the fiscal reforms necessary to approach what the European Commission wants them to do to reduce the budget deficit. And clearly, for the next year, that's not going to happen. We can be pretty sure there will be very little movement on that front. But on the other hand, you could say at least some of the uncertainties removed. We're not going to have the far left in power who will have the power to raise taxes massively, or the far right. Again, with some of their more extremist policies, at least we can see that both of these probabilities have been discounted for now.
So how about the wider economic picture in France? Of course, we see interest rates starting to fall. Household consumption is a big engine of the French economy. So how do you see things unfolding here?
Yeah, I think what's much more important for the French and for the European economy moving forwards is not so much this French election, but much more what happens to inflation. And we believe inflation actually will fall below 2%. Remember, inflation has been hurting consumers a lot, and that's why, unlike the US, European consumption has been depressed up until recently. But now with inflation at 2%, and we think going below 2% in the next few months, and with the ECB secondly, therefore able to cut rates further, and we think deposit rate gets to 3.25% by the end of the year, that will help companies, that will help people wanting to finance homes, investments, and I think that will help consumption and help ultimately a modest rebound in the European economy.
And we were chatting a little bit earlier, and you said, of course, this hung parliament result kind of takes away a little bit of the uncertainty, but there's still uncertainty on the market. And the big question is that November election, the other election, the big one.
And again, it's not even November, it's way before that, because clearly there is a huge question mark within the Democratic Party after the first presidential debate. We all know President Biden for now is hanging on, but we also know there's a strengthening caucus within the Democratic Party, and most importantly, within the sponsors, those people providing the money to finance the campaign, to move away from President Biden to another candidate, whether it be Kamala Harris or perhaps even somebody else. And I think that those echoes grow stronger, and they will come to a head within the next week to 2 weeks. Either President Biden stays the course, or he changes, and we'll find out a new candidate very soon.
Bringing it back to Europe and the situation we see here, of course, we hear from a sigh of relief in Brussels as well. So what does the economic situation in France now means, and the political scene as well means, for just the European economy in a broader sense?
Well, obviously it's the second biggest European economy, so it is still hugely important. I think on the foreign policy front, it's also important that President Macron stays in place, because of course that will be important, particularly for things like support of Ukraine, movements towards more European unity. These sort of movements are still crucially important, and thank goodness there's not been a change of government here for now, so there is no change in any of those policies. And I think that is important to ensure some form of stability. But ultimately, it comes back to the economic question. Will we see consumption rebound? We think we will. Will inflation continue to fall? We think it will. And will, most importantly, interest rates, will they come down? And will that allow, for instance, property prices to stabilize or even go back up? Because the wealth effect in Europe is also very important for financing and fueling consumption, and property prices up until recently were under pressure because of high interest rates. Interest rates coming down should help property prices stabilize or maybe even go up in a number of European countries in the near future.
And we've seen